Okay, so I think we're just going to start now. The second session of the seminar on this question, regulate the metaverse. And dear friends and colleagues, we now have this in the seminar also the students of the Master on Competition Law and Distribution Law. I guess Thibault will have a lecture with his students this afternoon also. But for now, it's the second session of this seminar on regulating this, the metaverse. And the first speaker will be Fabiana di Porto from the University of Salento. I'm so glad to share this panel and hear you on this question of interoperability. So you can use the microphone. This one doesn't really work, so I'm going to give you this one.
Okay.
Otherwise, I don't know if it's really necessary to use the microphone. Let's try.
Okay. Let's try.
Yeah, I think it's better.
Okay. Because I have too many things now.
That seems to
Yes, exactly. Okay. Thank you very much, David. We'll go straight to the point. Metaverse and interoperability. Interoperability is probably at the heart of the current debate over the metaverse. My claim today is that interoperability is actually one of not just the most important topic about the metaverse, but it's about its governance. Deciding over interoperability means deciding over the governance of the future metaverse. So I would start by asking what is
work.
Where?
It's supposed to be here.
To be here.
Otherwise, you can.
Yeah.
Use. Wait.
Yeah.
Oh, you push the.
No, I have really too many things.
Right.
Yes. Okay. So, what is interoperability? Well, if we think of one of the most non-interoperable systems that we know, there is language. Two people speaking two different languages will not be able to communicate if translation didn't exist. So, but we have in nature also examples of interoperability whereby, as chameleons, can change the structure of their, and they can manipulate distance between the nanocrystals encapsulated in the skins in order to change the color of the skin. That in turn overcomes a problem of communication, because by changing the color of the skin, they can actually communicate either fear or other social behavior, like displaying aggression, or otherwise with the darker skin displaying the willingness to submit or give up. But we have examples. This is really.
Yeah.
The other one is working. Okay, so maybe we should just take the other one. Okay, we have examples of interoperability or the lack.
How many you might?
No problem, no problem. The lack of interoperability, even in art, because a slight modification of a system can actually prevent it to communicate with another. In the same way as two formats may become incompatible due to small or major changes, as is the case with the very famous Bernini's Daphne, who turned her shape into a tree to become non-interoperable with Apollo. And clearly, I cannot proceed with this review of definitions and applications of what I mean by interoperability without including a slide with a quotation by a political philosopher marked on a black background, and there you go. But in industrialized times, interoperability has actually profoundly contributed to development of services. And here we have the example of train tracks and the difference between gauge tracks required of interoperability in order to allow cross-border trips of trains already a century ago. That marks the relevance, okay, of interoperability. However, besides stories of interoperability success, we also have sad stories of interoperability failure, like the one that concerns consumers who dream of one remote control or voice assistant that could operate all of our digital and electronic equipment, not to speak of uncountable electricity plugs that exist in Europe, hopefully not for too long. But why is interoperability relevant for the metaverse? Well, interoperability implies that harmonization specifications and state-of-the-art know-how of a service or product be disseminated so that they are compatible, they make compatible service able to be developed. So to answer this question, why is interoperability relevant to the metaverse? We need to make a decision of about what definition we want to use about metaverse. Answering why interoperability is relevant for metaverse really utterly depends on the definition we take. While looking at the market, what operators are striving for in this moment is to have an immersive and persistent three-dimensional user experience that continues to evolve even when users are not connected to it. So the idea of metaverse is to have just one persistent environment that allows people to interact. Clearly, in such a scenario, the lack of interoperability may cause several problems that we're going to look at. Sorry. Okay. So if the metaverse is a unified user experience and interconnected system, that would require globally accepted interoperability standards. And in such a scenario, then interoperability would be functional to several different goals. So I collected here 5 goals, which are taken from the US Congress Research Center report, and which include the possibility of allowing people to move seamlessly across multiple network virtual spaces. And also interoperability will be functional to provide access to different platforms and services, to interact with other users, to use the same human computer interface devices, such as VRs or augmented reality glasses, or even using the same digital assets. And this is especially relevant if we consider digital identity, digital currency, and objects or tokens, like, for instance, NFTs. So if this is what we have in mind, then full interoperability will be required, both vertically and horizontally. Not only that, but we would also need globally accepted interoperability standards in order to have such a metaverse to exist. So who should ensure interoperability? Currently, instead of having just one or maybe a few organizations establishing standards and of interoperability, what we have so far is a plethora of international initiatives where distinct groups are actually working to develop open interoperability technical standards. So these are three examples. You all know the World Wide Web Consortium, which has created its Metaverse Interoperability Community Group. Then we have the Open Metaverse Foundation and the Metaverse Standards Forum. The three of them are interesting to me because they are all purporting open interoperability technical standards, and this is quite new. And I tell you why. If we take a look at the last one, the Metaverse Standards Forum, we will notice that, okay, this group and this initiative has grown very fastly in just a few months. Just to give you an idea, this group was made of 35 founding organizations last June, and in the wake of just a few months, there are more than 1,500 members that count. Now there is a huge effort of putting together many of the most prominent actors in the field of metaverse to define its standards, as you can see from here. That, of course, indicates how relevant this path is, but also how many difficulties this path also crosses. If you go on a website, you can actually take a look at how many and how relevant the operators participating in these initiatives are. But we also have a European initiative, which is the European Commissioner Breton saying and launching this creative and interdisciplinary movement aiming at developing standards to increase interoperability. And in that goal, the Commission has also launched the Virtual and Augmented Reality Industrial Coalition. From what we heard yesterday, it seems that this group is no longer a priority, or maybe yes, or it should. This is clearly an open question. So, to be sure, interoperability standards should be set for 4 different layers. And these layers are software architecture. And when considering interoperability for the sake of making different metaverses interoperable, then what we tend to consider is this distinction between centralized versus decentralized metaverses. True, there are metaverses that are based on blockchain and they tend to be qualified as decentralized metaverses. However, we have in this case also to take into consideration that there are some limitations with interoperability solutions with blockchain, if we use blockchain, such as Ethereum, because if the number of transactions increase rapidly, then there can be problems there, and different solutions should be found in order to overcome problems of interoperability, as has happened already. And we should consider solutions like side chains, such as Polygon, or eventually other solutions that are being developed, such as, for instance, Cosmos or lamina. As far as identification is concerned, there the idea is that avatars or people may move freely from one metaverse to the other. Then we need to ensure interoperability of identity certification systems, which is crucial to allow this movement. In this sense, I think that one of the most interesting proposal is the one coming from Beilinson, who proposed the crypto DNA. So the idea being that it would be impossible, every user avatar can be identified through this DNA blockchain, which would allow to tie identity uniquely to an avatar, therefore being sure that an individual cannot simultaneously bring to life a plurality of avatars. As far as user interfaces, devices are concerned, such as visors or virtual assistants, we know that companies tend to have their own, tend to develop, at least so far, they tend to develop their own device and therefore have it operable only within one given metaverse. So they integrate their services into their own existing devices. The result might be that there is a highly fragmented marketplace of competing systems, and therefore it is overwhelmingly relevant to have more interoperability there. And concerning, lastly, digital assets, of course, we have a lot. We need to have coins and payment systems and NFTs that can freely circulate from one metaverse, from one digital space to another, so that we can easily use. And there we have a lot of examples coming from the financial crypto, from crypto finance that provide really nice examples on how to overcome problems that might arise there. So what does the law say about interoperability? So ideally, users should be able to move across metaverses without limits. So can antitrust help in this regard? Yesterday, we listened to several speakers talking about this issue. So I will go very fast on these topics. But the idea is that interoperability can fictiously be limited, and this may be relevant in terms of competition law, because we might have lock-in effects that may arise and that lead to eventually a substantial number of users to single home. And this issue was discussed in the Nintendo already back in 2003 in the Nintendo case. Also, we have cases where refusal to provide interoperability information to competitors by a dominant firm may account to an abuse, an exclusionary abuse, as was the case with Microsoft in 2004. And also selectively degrading of interoperability may also be problematic when assessing mergers, as was the case in the Google Fitbit case. Another possible configuration is actually that one metaverse prevails over the others until the market tips. And there you might have lock-in effects that are possible and causing the effect that even if the quality of one monopolistic metaverse degrades, that you will have switching. Here you have a horizontal inter-metaverse competitive issues that eventually competition law might help relax. Well, the question then arises, if we think to the metaverse, as we said in the beginning, as an immersive and persistent place. How realistic is such a metaverse? Tips. Or eventually, speaking in terms of interoperability, then the question becomes, how realistic is that operators limit fictiously interoperability? To me, this is, of course, my opinion, not many. Beyond antitrust, if we look at the issue of interoperability from a regulatory standpoint, then we have to check whether what the DMA says about interoperability. And the DMA, as we all know, can and does apply to the metaverse. This was already stated by Commissioner Thierry Breton in September this year. But also, if we just read the DMA, we learn that it is absolutely applicable to this immersive metaverse, because it would be applicable to core platform services, among which online intermediation services, search engines, social network services, operating services, web browsers, virtual assistants, and cloud computing, for sure. So what are the relevant provisions? 6.4 and 6.7 would be the relevant provisions there, which actually force the gatekeepers to allow interoperability. I will not go into the detail of the rules, which are, to me, they present several aspects which are worth noticing. However, what Article 6.4 and 6.7 do require of gatekeepers is that they actually provide with those articles actually establish a sort of a neutral treatment clause among those operators seeking interoperability. First. Second, both articles are actually related to just one of the issues we have tackled, which is vertical interoperability. So consideration about this, and I go to my conclusions. Is the DMA fit for the metaverse? Well, actually, first, as I just said, the DMA mainly deals with vertical interoperability and also allows gatekeepers to not to provide interoperability based on integrity and security grounds. So although Article 6 and 4, 6 and 7 are absolutely remarkable, if what we have in mind is a totally immersive 3D user experience kind of metaverse, then I don't know whether that would be enough. As far as horizontal interoperability, that is uncovered by Article 6, and because issues related to competition among metaverses, inter-metaverses competition are covered and regulated under a different article, a different label, which is the one of data portability. However, so people are free to move their data and even their object, to some extent, we could apply that provision also to digital tokens. However, this is pretty much an individual rights-based provision, meaning that it entrusts individuals, be they final users or intermediate users, with the right to port their data or their objects or whatever we want to call them. Also, I can figure that there is a sort of conflict, if you want, or maybe a question might arise as how convergent are rules on data silos in the DMA, so set in Article 5.2, which actually prevent the gatekeeper to combine or cross-use data with the goal of establishing the widest interoperability. I'm sorry that there is a mistake in the slide. So if the goal again is to have the widest interoperability possible, then how are we going to cope with those provisions which in the DMA prevent gatekeepers from combining and cross-using data? So what I would say with regard to the DMA is that it is definitely a very gatekeeper specific piece of legislation, and that we should take into consideration the two facts. The first one is that other decentralized operators might become relevant or are already very relevant in this pervasive idea of a metaverse, that probably the DMA is not designed to consider. And then a second claim is also that the line between centralized and decentralized metaverses is blurring. And we have already signs, we have already insights of that, from the fact that Meta is, for instance, allowing final users to mint NFTs on Instagram. And with this, probably what it has in mind is to actually allow more, to have more marketplaces for NFTs. Then the question again is, how will the DMA impact this process of increasing integration between centralized, so-called centralized and decentralized metaverses? Finally, and this is my really last slide, we have concerns, horizontal standardizations remains the big issues which is unsolved. It is not solved under the DMA for sure. And so what can we do is what we have in mind is a persistent model of metaverse. So one approach is the case-by-case approach, is the antitrust approach, and then we might consider that all the standardization and interoperability agreements that are in the making in this specific moment could be, of course, they could be revised under Article 1013, and then we should, of course, consider again what we have in mind and what we want to achieve. As far as the DMA, one possibility for the European Commission is that it actually expands the horizontal interoperability, making use of its delegated powers, considering that interoperability obligations are set in Article 6, which, as we all know, is not self-executing, but can be further specified by the European Commission, making use of its delegated power. Finally, I think that the very last point would be that alternatively, or in addition, the EC should make a little bit more effort to succeed in taking the lead of the standardization battle that we have seen that is currently going on. And at least it should try to intercept this global or at least regional consensus to include multi-stakeholder voices, because one of the main limitations of the regional initiatives that I have been reviewing previously is that they are really restricted just to the business or the standard setting organizations. Why? You will not have any civil society contributing to the debate. You will not have any other voices. And this, to me, is relevant to the extent that we are discussing interoperability as a matter of governance and not just as a competition or a regulation problem. And other interests should be considered while setting standards. And to me, they also should be encoding in standards by design. Just to make examples, safety and privacy are principles that to some extent can be already now encoded into the standards, and that would be that moment to do that. And the same would be true for anti-discrimination measures and, of course, dignity and inclusion. And having said that, thank you very much.
So much, Fabiana. A terrific introduction to this second seminar. I think we're going to follow on right away with Fred. And if you have a question for Fabiana, please write it down. We will open the Q&A session just afterwards. Thank you very much. You
I stay here.
Yeah, I'll stay here. Where's the tech guy?
Tu viens rester debout. Comme tu veux. C'est toi. C'est toi qui vas le faire. Yes. Yeah, okay, thank you. Perfect. Perfect. Marty. Okay, thank you.
It's okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So after the tech guy, the low-tech one, that is to say me, I want first to warmly thanks with my broken English, I'm sorry, Fabiana and David for their kind invitation. I will present not really a joint paper, but perhaps a project of a joint paper co-authored with GMPO. And we will speak on some subjects that Fabiana has already covered in her intervention, especially issues like the implementation of interoperability remedies to metaverses, and perhaps to make a deep on the implementation of the essential facility doctrine to metaverses. So we have a very, very traditional issue, that is to say, should we rely only on antitrust law and competition laws to regulate the competition in the area of metaverse? So 3 or 4, 5 in fact, successive questions. The first, very quick, only 10 or 11 slides on the economics of metaverses. In fact, are metaverses only digital ecosystems, and we will observe only the same phenomena. Second issue, is it the same story again and again? That is to say, a winner takes all story. After, should we rely only on competition law? Why? And should we use other instruments to regulate the competition, like DMA type injunctions, like platform neutrality requirements, or EFD, essential facility doctrine implementation? And what are the associated costs of this kind of regulation. So, first, some words about the uncertain future. But I know nothing about metaverses, and I think I have to concede that I know nothing, but nothing at all about the future of metaverses. That is to say, we can say, okay, it is the same story, a digital ecosystem. We have network effects, we have a need of complementary or coordinated investment. And we do not know exactly what will be the future market dynamic, the future technological path, centralization, decentralization, and if we have something like a big metaverse, or if we can obtain a competition between metaverses. First, the winner takes all model. That is to say, we have the effects that we know, that we have already observed for ecosystems. That is to say, network effects, increasing returns to scale and scope, and something like never-ending learning effect. So we have issues in terms of efficiency. It is a matter of competition law, but also issues in terms of market tipping and the coexistence or adjacent closed silos ecosystems. So a question of the competition for the market, that is to say, the contestability, and a second question related to the competition within the market, that is to say, our famous fairness. The outcome is not already settled. In fact, we can see that when we have some big techs, we need to separate not the sheep from the goats, but we have to make a clear distinction between the business model. And some of these big techs have a very, very specific business model which relies on attention markets, which relies on data. And some of these models can be at risk if network effects progressively slow down. And for firms like Meta, it is necessary to disrupt itself. That is to say, to self-disrupt. Why? Because you have some competitors, Snapchat, TikTok, and so on. And Meta perhaps will try to do the same thing that Apple did in 2007. That is to say, to self-disrupt its iPod with its iPhone. So we can say, okay, it is only a problem of leveraging. I have a dominant position on the web 2.0. I will try to conquer a dominant position on the web 3. So it is a matter of envelopment strategies with kill zones. You know the paper of Rajan, Kamepali, and Zigales in 2020. A problem of killer acquisition or reverse killer acquisitions, a problem of nascent competitor exclusion, that is to say, nothing under the sun. If we take, for instance, the case of mergers, and we will see mergers in a few minutes, we have already some cases. We have a procedure opened by the Federal Trade Commission related to acquisition of within by Meta. I just present two very quick points on that case. First, the idea, that is to say, according to which, the idea according to which you can conquer the market, you can consolidate your market position, not from the upstream to the downstream, but through apps. And here with Supernatural, that is to say, the app of fitness developed by Wizzy, you can add something like a killer app, like the store, the app store of Google, in the case of Google Android, for instance. And if we count our colleague John Newman, which is now, who is now, sorry again for my English, John, who is now at the head of the competition bureau, I think, of the FTC, John described, in fact, something like a strategy consisting in buying a dominant position and not conquering a dominant position through the merits. That is to say, always the same old song. In fact, if we consider the span of anti-competitive strategies related to the metaverse, by which you could perhaps leverage your market position, you have a lot of practices. Take first predatory pricing case with the Quest headsets. The FTC opened a procedure against Meta for predatory pricing. That is to say, you can create lock-in effect through complementary products. That is to say, the headsets. You can say, okay, you can also have abuses against trading partners through the app stores with exploitative abuse through fees, exclusionary abuse, like Fabiana has described, abuse of economic dependent position by imposing single roaming, and you have also risk for end users like excessive data extraction, privacy-related issues, lock-in effect, and perhaps something like an augmented dark pattern within the metaverse. So we can say, okay, it's already over. You can leverage your position. It is not sure. We can consider something like a oligopoly scenario. I do not know who is responsible for this concept, by saying, okay, Meta compete on this market with other big states. Consider only the acquisition of Activision Blizzard by Microsoft. You have some new entrants. Consider only the case of the first competitor of Meta in the headset sector, that is to say, ByteDance with the Pico headsets. After, you have some limits on the timing strategies. This is the case of Meta. If you want to use theoretically your headset, you need to have, first, it is not the case now, a Facebook account. Okay, you say perfect timing. You will benefit from the network effects. I was a user of Google+. Every user of Gmail had a Google+ account. Google+ still no longer exists. It is very sad. We have also the case of Google Glasses 10 years ago with augmented reality. It is not a killer equipment. After, if you want to develop something like metaverses, you need to rely on complementary investment by complementers, and you cannot exploit, you cannot exclude your complementer if you depend from your complementer. And after, it is not sure that the motto, scale, scope, and learning effect will apply everywhere. So, are the competition laws useful for this purpose? First, even if we have an exclusion of competitors, even if we have a monopoly, it is not a problem for competition law. Our problem is an abuse of dominant position. Our problem is a monopolization that is to say, to acquire, to maintain, or to extend a dominant position with other tools than the merits. So the dominant position does not imply an abuse of dominant position. And if we have an abuse, we can sanction it. But we can again apply a DMA type reasoning. That is to say, we want to preserve contestability, to prevent the tipping, to guarantee that current dominant position will be still challengeable or contestable in the future. We can say, okay, we want to ensure a fairness type objectives, loyalty, distributional concern. We want to avoid the abuse of private economic power and so on. And we can say, okay, we have also an issue in terms of consumer protection. If I can extract data, I can discriminate among my consumer. I can exploit their weakness. I can try to make a first degree discrimination in prices. I can manipulate their behavior. It is easier in the metaverse than with the laptop by definition. And I can exclude from the market some competitors. But again, we have some tools for this. 3 examples regarding mergers. We have structural thresholds, okay, but we can also implement the Article 22 and see the last decision of the Commission in the case Illumina Grade. That is to say, even you buy a startup, we can control it. For the good or for the bad, I do not know, but you can control. Second example, you can use the German GVB. I will try to avoid to speak in German here because I have no chance with this. If you use the section 19A of the GVB, you can tackle the issue raised by firms with a significant importance across markets. And again, we have an example. A decision of the Bundeskartellamt last November regarding Meta with 2 commitments of Meta, the framework of this decision. First, to prevent tying. If you want to use Quest headsets, you will not be obliged to have a Facebook account, but a dedicated account. And second, we have something like data silos, like Fabiana has described, that is to say, on the model of Google and Fitbit. You cannot merge the silos. Very last point, you can use Section 5 of the FTC Act if you are in the States. And we have a restatement about the FTC Act in order to tackle many unfair and deceptive commercial strategies before observing any effect at the inception of the practice. So, is it necessary to have something like a regulatory term? Perhaps, if you consider that competition law enforcement is not sufficient, and here you have 3 cases. The first one, Fabiana has already described the case of the DMS, so I will just point the 5 points. Here it is easier because it is not bullet point but numbers. The first one, self-preferencing prevention strategies or measures. Measures in the DMA aiming at limiting the possibility to implement tying and bundling strategies. It is very important in the case of the metaverses. The prohibition of distorted access to data, see, for instance, the Amazon case before the European Commission, and provisions related to interoperability and portability. Second point, second possibility, to implement here the essential facility doctrine. That is to say, mandating an access, an undistorted access to the metaverse. So it is an hot topic regarding digital platforms. I got here a paper of Eric Ovenkamp, a recent paper on the subject, but it raises also some difficulties regarding EU laws. US, it is worse, but just consider the case of EU law. First, we have a question of indispensability. I can apply the essential facility doctrine, but only if the access is indispensable to access the market. If I have several metaverses, I'm not sure. Second point, when we have the essential facility doctrine, in principle, we have to make a balance of incentives. Incentive to invest, incentive to innovate, and so on. It is not sure that an access will not downgrade, reduce, these incentives. Last point, an access, okay, but what will be the price? It is a question of front condition, a fair, reasonable, and not discriminatory. One of the last points, imposing a platform interoperability or something like a platform neutrality. Again, it is a way to consider that digital ecosystems and metaverses, in our case, are something like public utilities. It was written in a complaint of an assistant attorney general of the Ohio state in June 2021 against Google, saying, okay, Google should be submit to the state public utility law because it is a public utility. And we have a long run debate in economics on this point. Is a public utility natural monopoly, a network, and we can implement this theory only to network industries like railroads, electricity, and so on? Or can we implement this theory to any industries, that has significant impact on public interest. And you have this point in the very, very old US case law, the German Association, the German Alliance Insurance Company in 1914, in which the court considered that the qualification of affectation with the public interest also concerns any business that by circumstances or nature rises from private to a public concern. But if we jump on our side of the Atlantic Ocean, we have also a tendency to expand the scope of these access requirements, no discrimination requirements, that is to say, to extend the logic of Article 106 of the treaty to 102 case of the treaty. And you have a very good paper of Pablo Ibanez Colomo on this point. So, in fact, I would not develop this because I speak for a very, very long time now. But again, you have perhaps some competition law failures, but you have also regulatory favors. And, if you want to regulate the competition, there is no free lunch in this matter. So you can have a lot of negative impact. Negative impact as an asymmetric regulation of competition, the impairing due process guarantee, being at risk to be captured by trading partners, and so on. And to implement sometimes tricky remedies. Interoperability is not so easy to implement, especially in some fields like metaverses. Very quick, in conclusion, the metaverses raise a lot of competition concerns. Some of them certainly will be addressed through competition law. Some other perhaps can be taken with the DMA. And is it necessary to go beyond this frontier, to go beyond this scope? Perhaps no, I hope no. But we have always to take into consideration that we have two risks in this kind of matters, carry this and see that. The first one is to try to construct the market. That is to say, I have a model of an ideal market, and I will try to construct this ideal model in reality. You can go to try to define ex-ante market structure to implement something like an industrial policy, or to separate activities. And you need, in fact, to find a reasonable tools to, how to say that, to preserve the market process. That is to say, to avoid suboptimal lock-in in the industry, to guarantee the loyalty of the competition, not the fairness, but the loyalty, and perhaps to implement an industrial policy, but this industrial policy should be limited to an environment policy. That is to say, to promote open technological standards for essential bricks of the metaverse. So thank you for your attention and for your patience regarding my English especially.
Thank you very much. You can just sit over there. On the other two.
This one working? Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't have a big voice today.
So you want to have this mic, okay?
I don't know. Do you hear me? Can you hear me? No.
But this one was the good.
Oh, this one's
Yes.
and is this better? Not better?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's follow on with Valérie-Laure Benabou. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everything, everywhere, all at once. You have to explain that to us.
Yeah.
Thank you very
But
much.
in between, I have changed my headline.
Ah.
So actually, I will speak about recommendation and try to accommodate.
This one.
Sorry?
The volume.
Oh,
Okay.
The volume.
I'm gonna.
c'est celui-là.
Ouais, je pense. Ouais. Okay. This one?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So I'm going to be talking about recommendation in the metaverse and try really it's not something that will be very developed in my talk. I will mostly discuss about what is recommendation and how it may shape the future of metaverse. And maybe in that perspective, that would be a major change to assess, to address the question of markets. So that's my main point, is like this. So first of all, very quick traveling in the future and in the past of the metaverse, because here you see the avatar of Mark Zuckerberg. And here you see something that is very much alike, and that is the avatar of Le Deuxième Monde de Canal+. That was a former project between 1997 and 2001, where there was a very interesting 3D representation of Paris, where you could buy some flats and things with a local currency. And that was quite a very interesting thing. Video game was not actually a video game. It was developed by Creo, that was at that time the very famous video game maker in France. But after 4 years only, because of the lack of investment, because of the lack of interest, the project has collapsed. So we know metaverse from long. And there's another experience that most of you may know, which is Second Life. So Second Word, Second Life. Between 2003 and 2007, created by Linden Lab. Here also you had a metaverse, and you still have that metaverse functioning with possibility to create things, build your own house near the sea, buy your own garments and so on, with cryptocurrencies. But here again, because of lack of investment, more or less the project has collapsed. So maybe the past can teach us something about the future, that it's a very risky industrial problem to create those kind of metaverse. And we have been discussing that at large, so I don't go back to it. But still, I want to look at the cosmogony for metaverses. What is in a name? What's in a name? Meta, universe, and it means all things, everybody, all people, the whole world. It's something that encompasses everything. Whereas when you try to see what is the etymology of the term meta, you see that there are many significations. Meta seems to mean in common with, in the middle, or in between, in the quest of after, beyond the universe, or a modification of place, order, or nature, or transcending, overarching, dealing with most fundamental matters. So either if you try to select each of those meanings, it would mean that metaverse would have a different purpose, a different aim, and mean something which is we can collaborate, we can have several metaverse, and it's something that coexists with the existing universe. Or we go beyond that, it's something that is radically new, and that we have to change our mindset in order to address this new issue, because it's something that we don't know yet. Or it's something that is better, that would mean that maybe there is a progress within the metaverse. That all those meanings made us think about the radical or not radical change that would be triggered by those metaverse. If you look at the consequences, they are multiple. Look at the subject, a legal subject. We are, as individuals or company, we are unique, and we are located somewhere. Sometimes it's difficult to locate individuals or company, but after a while, you can find, even if it's a fictitious, but some location somewhere. As for the metaverse, it's quite different, because you will not have one subject. You will have a multiplication of identities that would depend on the different metaverses you are in. And that means that we will be in a persistent metaverse simultaneously, us somewhere in different location. So it's the ubiquitous behavior that is possible within the metaverse, but it also seems to stick to what is our possibility now to move. We have known, because we consider the universe, the world as a whole, we have been through globalization and the movement of things, of merchandise, of people. But if we think that we are multiple, we don't need to move anymore. And I think that in the next future, we will not be able to afford all this movement. We know that it's not sustainable. So we will change our way of moving. We will move in the metaverse. Our mobility will be in the metaverse, but it will not be a globalized one world anymore, but several layers and the segmentation in those virtual worlds of our mobilities. And those considerations may have a significant importance for application of competition law. Now let's look at what is recommendation. I took the subject of recommendation because we had issued last year with my friend and colleague Joël Farchi a report for the CSPLA on recommendation for the music industry and the audiovisual industry. And we have been seeking what does mean recommendation. Actually, recommendations means also many different things. It's not only searching, we know recommendation by the way of a search engine. We look for something, we are making a request, and there's a classification following our requests. You have the search engine doing this, and it ranks the different solutions. So it's a very rough kind of recommendation. It's only classification between different options. But you can go further in recommendation. You can, for example, hesitate between different options. And now you're required for the system not only to rank, not only to establish a hierarchy, but to help you to make a choice. And this is, for example, what you do when you look at the advice of the users. When you look at the stars that are put by people saying that you should go to this hotel. So here you have a process of recommendation. It's not only I'm ranking things, but also I give you a piece of advice of what could be a good match for you. And you go also a little bit further, like you feel like making no efforts at all, and you expect the system to provide you with suggestion. You are not looking for something, but very vaguely, and you are quite passive as to the result and still ask a service like, where is a restaurant? Where is the next restaurant next to me? Here also is a kind of recommendation, which is localization. But localization is a form of recommendation. And finally, what you will see will be built in order to satisfy your presumed need, your expectation. And we have already this experience when you say, Alexa, I want to listen to music. Alexa will decide for you what kind of music you will hear, but not in an arbitrary way, but because they have already know what you used to listen and what you likely to like, and therefore try to design the perfect listening list for you. So we have different layers of recommendation that could shape the way we'll have this mobility within the metaverse. Because what we will have maybe in the future, I think I quoted the 2042 expectation. That's sex, buying, playing. That are the futures of the metaverse. I put sex because pornographic industries was already been very important in digital business.
Driving first.
Yeah, always first. And this is what you see is what you like. We had this acronym, WYSIWYG. Now it's what you will see. Well, is not what the other will see. You will see what you are expected to like. If you like brunette, you will have a brunette. If you like a further coat, you will have a further coat. If you like to play something, you'll be recommending something that your neighbor will have in the same space, in the same metaverse, a completely different way of seeing. Your landscape will not be the same. You will not be looking at the same thing. That will be very different. So when we talk about metaverse, we're not talking only about different technical or industrial solutions provided by industry, but also of the different layers of visibility, of mobility that you will have as a user within those different solutions. So it's really interesting. What are the main characteristics, main features of recommendation? You can have different kinds of recommendation. You can have a global recommendation that would be made in consideration of objective elements of the product or the service. You feel like drinking virtually water, so you will be conducted to drink virtual water. But it can be also, and this is the main issue for recommendation, very close to your own preferences, to your own expectation. So here you have a more subjective recommendation. I suggest you this because it's you, not because of the objective characteristic of the product. But you can also have recommendation, and all those are combined, actually, that result from exterior output, like the advice or the interaction of your community. I would talk about social recommendation here. So it means that there will be a very complex combination of the three layers of recommendation: objectivity of the product, subjectivity of the recipient of the recommendation, and also the social network within which you will evaluate that will have an impact on what you will see. Other characteristic of the recommendation is that it will be changing very quickly in order to capture the flow of information. It's a very dynamic process. Like ranking, for example, if you make a quest in Google at the moment, make it several times, the very same words, you will have more or less the same ranking, the same elements appearing. Whereas if you have a recommendation, which is more more sticking to your preferences, once you have such something with the machine learning and so on things, you will not have the same results the second time you are doing the request. You will not see the same thing because you have seen them already. And we know whether you liked it or not, whether you have stayed before the page for a very long period of time or not, you have skipped it, and we will immediately take that into consideration in what will be provided to you. But what is really important too is that the personalized recommendations post-processing personal data and monitoring the behavior of the recipient. So we have here a kind of emotional, behavioral recommendation, and that we are changing the way of thinking. We are going in depth in your emotion. We are willing to know how do you feel. It's emotional marketing has already been existing, but now it's basis for building this universe. How will you be reacting to that? Will you like it, not like it, having fear of it? And depending on the answer that you will give to the input, then the landscape will be modified. In the characteristic of recommendation per se is quite different from advertisement. Even if we have more or less the same result, that is, you are prioritizing content, it's not the same purpose. When you are prioritizing content on behalf of advertisements, because someone has paid you to push the content in front. Whereas in the recommendation system, normally, there's no purpose of exchanging money. You are recommending things in order to increase the quality of the recommendation system and of the service of recommendation and of the things that are recommended. Last but not least element, user may not know that there is an underlying classification that has been made, and that's what we are calling dark patterns problem, which is there is a recommendation, but you hardly know that there is one. You don't know that what you are seeing is actually the result of recommendation. So those are the problems with recommendation. So what are the answers, the pending answers? First of all, we are facing a quite new notion at the legal stage. And this notion has been recently defined within the DSA in Article 2, paragraph S. The recommender system is a fully or partially automated system used by an online platform to suggest in its online interface specific information to recipients of the service or prioritize that information, including as a result of a search initiated by the recipient of the service or otherwise determining the relative order or preeminence of information displayed. So it's not only when you are searching a result, it's otherwise. So you can be recommended without even knowing it. That's covered by the recommender system. And if you look, but I won't do that because I don't have time enough, but if you compare the definition of recommender system with advertisement and content moderation, you will see that there might be some overlap between those different notions. Because globally, you can see that promoting something is a kind of recommendation against money. This is advertisement. Removing something because it's illegal, it's also a way to make a hierarchy between what you are seeing and what is out of your view. But it's for different purposes. But nevertheless, those three elements are combining in order to address the question of recommendation as a whole, but it must be distinguished that from the recommendation per se that is defined within the Article 2S of the DSA. What is the regime for recommendation in the DSA? You have three main articles, Article 27, 38, and also Article 25. What are the results of the three provisions as to the regulation or recommendation? Transparency, choice within parameters for the users, non-profiling solution, but only for very large platform, and fighting against dark pattern by design. Very quickly, I will not go into the detail. Transparency, explicability is the big issue of DSA, both DSA and DNA. You have transparency everywhere. So the idea is that when you use a recommender system, you must say to the people how are drafted, are structured, the main feature, the main characteristic of your recommender system. But only the main says the text, not all of them. But which one? What will be the parameters that you have to explain, leaving aside the others? And according to the choice within the parameters, it's also the same. There is an obligation to provide for a choice for the user between different parameters, but we don't know how many parameters, how many options shall be kept by the one who designed the recommender system. It's not said. And what will be the core information to know whether you keep one option or not is also very, blurred. There is also this non-profiling solution. Just, we will give you a by default solution, which is not taken in consideration your data. But we have been discussing that very long time ago. No one will take something which is not relevant. What is the purpose of taking a solution which is not sticking to your own preferences, just in order to say, well, I will see what they are proposing to the other. Maybe you will do this one twice. But let's say you have music, you listen to music, you like to have a recommendation system that stick to your tastes. If you like heavy metal and someone is always playing jazz, you will say, what I don't feel like. And by default, if you listen to French music and you don't like it, you will not be very happy with this kind of by default or non-profiling solution. So even though it established some kind of, be safe because you will not be stuck in the filter bubble. Actually, we like to be in this filter bubble and we will not go ultimately out of it. Okay, so what is in the DMA on recommendation very quickly? Not so much actually. There's not a lot of definition as to recommendation. We have click-block there, some different elements, looking at the definition of online search engine or online social networking services that are sharing recommendation, virtual assistant, the definition of ranking, which is irrespective of whether only one result is presented or communicated. Interesting that you rank, but you rank only one thing. That is recommendation, actually. Search result, etc., etc. Actually, very quickly, because DMA is not very specific about recommendation. It prevents self-preference. We have said that at large already. So not be most favorable to the gatekeeper on product, but actually, normally, it's not a question of recommendation because if the recommendation is made according to your own preferences, the recommender system shall not trigger self-preference. There's also the requirement of changing the default setting, which is quite similar to the DSA. And transparency. So we'll find the same feature, transparency, changing the parameters, eventually having different options. But how, in a nutshell, how will it be working that? How far the recommender systems shall offer different options? And I mentioned that question already. We would have the ability to modify the parameters. This is really unclear. Who is the recipient of the service? Is it the final user, as it is said within the DMA? Only the final user have the possibility to modify the parameters. Whereas in the DSA, the possibility to modify the parameters is addressed both to the final user and to the business user. But who will prevail? Is the business user that would change the parameters and the final user cannot do? Both of them can do it? What about that? And there is a dark pattern prohibition, and by design you shall avoid to have this dark pattern. But actually, how do you control that? There are dark patterns within the very design of your recommender system or your system. Actually, it's very complicated because sometimes that pattern is not the result of an intention only, but it's a result of the systematic application of some features. Non-profiling solution, as I say, will be candidate for non-individual answers. We have seen that with Joël Farchi that the bubble filter effect is not proven. And you will certainly be preferring to stick to your to a solution which is matching with your expectation rather than a global an individual solution. Finally, about competition law per se. What I've said in the introduction may have some consequences on the definition of the market. We have been talking about interoperability between different metaverses, but what about geographical delineation? How will be addressing geographically the metaverses and the market? But most important is that how will be appraised substitutability if actually there is no market on the demand, there is no demand side market, but only an offer market. Because you will have something which is designed just for you. So how will you appraise the substitutability, the good price? How will you do to, how will you make the good price if you have no global reference anymore? Because everything has been designated for each person. Okay, so that's what. In order to finish with that, we have still a long way to walk towards the metaverse. As you have seen, maybe there's a very funny video showing that legs are coming on horizon. So we will definitely need those legs to walk towards the metaverse. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we're gonna open the Q&A session right away. So,
You talked about that in the last minute of your presentation about the market, but
Maybe, yeah.
you talked about that about in the last minute of your presentation about the market, but for abuse of dominant position, what do you think to be found for establish a relevant market? That is a real question. That presentation about the essential facility is very.
Answers. I only have questions. I'm sorry about that.
I have no clear answer, but the European Commission is going to revise its communication about relevant markets. Its first communication was made in 1997. I think that a lot of people in this room are not born then. It's clear that geographic criteria and substitutability criteria are challenged, as you said, by this definition. So the approach in terms of market is at risk if we consider our digital ecosystems, but it is always necessary to be sure about definition of dominance, about characterization of any abuse. In fact, if we want to measure something, we need to have a framework in the relevant market. It's this framework, but that we should or we must invent something else, but it is not trivial.
On peut baisser ça, parce que comme ça on ne se voit pas. Non, ah non, juste en bas.
I have a question as well for Fabiana di Porto and Frédéric. Marty, you speak about decentralization. And my question is about how to handle this new kind of architecture, computer architecture. Because when we speak about decentralized architecture, we speak about decentralized organization, which does not have legal person. So what do you think about this? Should we regulate and give a legal person to a decentralized organization, or should you, how to handle this topic?
Who wants to?
Okay, I go.
It works.
It works, okay. Well, the problem of giving or entrusting legal personality to a whatever private entity for the sake of participating in the metaverse, I think is not only relevant for DAOs, but as we have seen is also relevant for individuals and in perspective also for robots. Okay, so as long as whatever entity has got legal personality, as is the case with the robot Sophia, for instance, in Saudi Arabia, then you entrust this entity with legal capacity, meaning that that entity would be able to sign contracts and to enter into transactions with other human beings or with other legal entities. So you are asking whether someone, and then a question might arise, who this someone should be, should recognize legal, should entrust DAOs with legal personality. So to me, the reason is for the sake of what? Meaning, if, again, what we have in mind is this big and huge persistent space where all these platforms and also decentralized, what are now conceived of as decentralized metaverses, or just, for instance, blockchains, participate, then we have to ask ourselves, do we need legal personality, or are we happy enough with some certification system that says that entity exists, and to me, whatever it does is somehow trustable and is sure, is transparent, is encapsulated in the blockchain, or whatever you want. So it really depends on what the goal is. And having said that, I understand that there is a, let's say, a difference in culture also between the two centralized and decentralized architectures, because one is was born precisely to, if you want, contrast the other. So I can see what the main cause of concern is there. So if you recognize legal capacity to those organizations, then you are betraying the very reason for having such organizations, which is having power dispersed among individuals, etc. So it depends on what is the goal of the would-be policymaker and who that policymaker should be.
Thank you very much. I have no answer on my side, but I will just insist on one point. If we have decentralization, we can assume that it is better in terms of competition law and economics. That is to say, no dominance, individual dominance related issues, and so on. But we can have also some concerns regarding coordinated practices. And we can have something like cartels or collusive practices within the metaverse. And it echoes me questions like the ones raised by hub and spoke conspiracies. That is to say, it's a case in which you can, through a metaverse, have the capacity to coordinate behavior between competing firms. And in that case, even an institution, technical device is a decentralized one, we can say, okay, there is a responsibility of the entity as a rule, and perhaps some rules regarding the attribution of responsibilities among the different participants. Yeah. But again, it is only a way to transform your question in another
in another, yes, in another seminar.
Thank you, Fred. Here. Yeah.
Thank you very much to all of you. I have a specific question to Valérie-Laure. First, just a quick comment regarding personalized content. I don't know if in France or in Europe you also have this kind of project, but in Switzerland we have more and more some kind of discoverability parameters, so we force platforms to provide some discoverability parameters and potentially right to discoverability, I think. But beyond that, just a quick question. You mentioned the bubble system not proven. I would be very happy to hear your outcome. And my longer question is the interface between the instruments you looked at, TSA and DMA, with other instruments such as GDPR again, but also AI Act for disclosing manipulative systems. So I'm very interested in this complementarity and how would you see the interface between these other instruments?
I think we're going to get a question from Fabiana.
So we have a question from Gela Rabu, and I'm going to read his message. First of all, I would like to thank Valérie-Laure for her work on the word metaverse, which in my mind reveals that first of all, a cultural and political issue and an economic issue about which we should not be naive. I understand that the centralized or decentralized of metaverse, the interoperability between different metaverse would have consequences on the dominance of operators like Meta and the democratization of the use of metaverse on the implementation of the essential facilities theory. For instance, Meta could be only a service provider, but not necessarily the owner of the data processing and storage infrastructure. It could have a model close to cloud computing. Would you see this as a barrier to the application of the essential facilities theory? The question is on the computer.
Yeah, she's reading it.
Okay, you have 2 minutes to answer the questions.
I'm just, as to the filter bubble, it's it's empirical, but we have been doing that with Joël for music and audiovisual works, and it appeared that it's something that is really pushed forward by the right holders, that there is a filter bubble, but actually it's not. Meaning that once you like something, you have more chances to find it again and to have this kind of recommendation going backward. You have this kind of there's a boomerang effect, but it doesn't mean that you're a prisoner of a filter bubble. But I'm saying that for music and audiovisual that we have been looking for. I'm not saying that for news because I don't know actually how it works for news. As to the découvrabilité concept that comes from Quebec also, we have seen that also, but it's quite complicated to implement standards of discoverability. It's like the quotas for works, French quotas and so on. You can put those criteria in order to increase the visibility of some elements in the ranking within the parameters. But once you have a recommendation system that is functioning, if you don't like what is being pushed forward, you will not look at it, and then it will go backward it will be deranked actually. So even if you have these parameters for discoverability, you will not keep them for long if you want to have a good functioning system of recommendation. And for the last question, I will skip it because it's so huge and it's so controversial. I mean that the Commission has been willing to have this digital agenda and has been putting so many texts without thinking to the coordination of them. So I think there's a very big achievement that we have to do that as a doctrine, but also the Commission at the point shall have this kind of assessment of the compatibility, the interoperability of the text. And with the GDPR, it's a nightmare. We will all live in this nightmare, and I surely don't have answers for that.
We have a topic for next seminar, interoperability among all these provisions. Yes, thank you very much. We're going to have a break, 15 minutes break, and then we go back. And Maggie, you can